Hello and welcome to Prime Lenses. I'm Ian. Each week I speak to a photographer about 3 lenses that have meant something to them on their photographic journey. It's unashamedly gear chat, but hopefully focused more on the images made with that gear than performance metrics and graphs. My guest today is Mel McVeigh, an award-winning photographer and creative director that I've had the privilege of knowing for well over a decade. We should probably stop counting, just in case. I wanted to talk to her because recently she's been experimenting with generative AI tools as she continues to explore themes of intimacy and relationships in her photography. Combining these human themes with what many would consider tools that are inherently inhuman might seem like a bit of a contradiction, but it led to a really interesting conversation, and I think Mel has a very interesting perspective on using these tools. It was a great conversation, so without further ado, here is Mel. Yeah, well, see, it's the way I do it. The show is the show, Mel. Like that. This is how we go. We just start.
All right.
Right, and then it's like I flatter myself that I'm stealing this technique from Mark Maron, where he just starts the thing, and it's quite fun because you have loads of people. Then I've had it happen a few times where people get part way in, and they're just like, "Have we started?" I'm like, "Yeah, the show's the show. Well, let's just go." But yeah, how is London town, Mel McVeigh?
It's really nice, although, I really wish summer would appear. I mean, it's a falsehood to think we actually get one, but I'm not often here.
Yes.
In June, July, and I'm finding the lack of sunshine a challenge, but it's all right.
I think it's been a perpetual challenge for you with Europe in general. We've talked about it in the 16 years. Something like that we've known each other, which is nuts and brilliant in equal measure. But yeah, I think the cold London on a sunny day then gets into you, and then you go, oh, it's always going to be like this. It's like a good Polaroid. And then you go, no, sweet child.
And look, but when London is like that, it's the most glorious feeling in the world. It's like everything washes away, just happiness abounds in all people. You get a bit loud. I live in Dalston, so it's it's not the countryside. So I have to get used to people living and breathing and having fun at all times of the day.
Yes, and night, which I imagine is loads of fun.
Yeah.
I heard a while ago some cities have a night mayor now. A mayor who's in charge of the nightlife. I think Amsterdam tried one out. I don't know whether they still have that person in post. But they're the mayor for the city, but focused on nightlife. So supporting restaurants, clubs, businesses that basically make their money in the evening. But it's a funny thing to say out loud as well, that they have a nightmare.
That's actually, I love that phrase. But I heard that there's basically Hackney has a 24-hour noise complaint thing. And the thing is, that's the beauty of East London. I think that I've been talking about it with my neighbours, because also this is the only part of London where I've had I know all my neighbours and they all know me and we gossip. I never had that in Islington, never had that in Finsbury Park, whereas here, but at the same time, that's the beauty of East London and Dalston, is it's eclectic morning, noon, night. I live next to a pub that opens at 8 a.m, but they're also really good. They shut at 10, but you have to get used to that rhythm. But then I talk about, if you live in Italy or Spain and you live in the city, it's the same, right? The joys of big urban centres, and you actively choose to live here, right?
Yeah.
Maybe third night in a row, I'm a bit like last night. I had to move. But overall, I wouldn't leave.
No, who'd want to? The person that leaves is bored of a city, is bored of life, right? Says the man stuck in his Highland fortress of solitude.
No, but
it's pretty good. Alice did make fun of me recently because I'm making all these friends around the world, and we've been here nearly a year and I still don't know tons of people on my doorstep. I'm just spending my time accidentally turning a podcast into a job so that I can talk to people all over the place.
So how's it going?
Yeah. Well, I think it's good. I am resisting looking at the stats, right? I have decided week 1 was about 500. I thought that was such a big launch for something. I was like, right, I'm never going to look again. And I think it's good. I'm getting lots more messages from people who listen, and lots of little things on social. So the intention is not to blow this up into something big. It's just for fun. But I think knowing any number would be bad. You remember Steve Waller, who we used to work with, who's done his design thinking thing. He's done it for years. And I really enjoy it. It's really good. But I think he finds the kind of 6 or 7 years of working on this thing and like the numbers being what they are. It's a question of like what number would be enough. Like if it was like 1,000, would I wish it was 5,000? Would I wish it was 10,000? Like who knows?
If you haven't watched it, no, I'm going to be bad because I'm terrible with names. But I watched
Mm,
a South by Southwest YouTube video last night with the founder of Patreon,
mm,
and the talk is called "The Death of the Follower." It's ultimately
yeah,
not about the death of the follower, but it's about building out Patreon around fans and what number's good enough, and
yeah,
like what like what feeds you as opposed to what feeds the algorithm. And
mm,
I'm going to watch it again because it was just like, yes, like
yeah.
it shouldn't matter whether it's 5, 10, 100,000, but if you're getting joy out of it, then
Which I
that's enough,
absolutely
right?
am.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so and he was like, the problem with the internet now, as you would know, because it's all algorithmic and it's all about followers and reach and
Mm,
count and scale. If you're a creator of any kind, that's the essence of his talk. Is that it's a real philosophical one, even for me, because I don't do a lot of this kind of outreachy or sharing stuff, and like and I kind of want to, but then I think I would get hooked on the numbers, and I don't want to do
mm,
that. Like it's not good for my
yeah.
mental health.
No.
And it's not why I do it. So it's, yeah, but as someone who works in that industry, it's also fascinating because of the way he describes the future of effectively publishing, which is my day job, right? Like
Yeah.
these are very existential questions about what it is to create, publish, produce, share, monetize, all
Yeah.
the keywords.
Yeah.
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 So
Exciting times, which leads us, I suppose, nicely onto because with the death of the social web and like the stuff that we all kind of thought was here forever for the last 15, 16 years, your Facebooks, your Twitters and things like that's kind of like as that kind of comes to an end in a lot of ways. You've been one of the first people, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you because you've got this kind of nice overlap with photography is you've also really embraced generative image making in a way that a lot of photographers and traditional photographers haven't. But you've kind of like you seem to be getting a lot out of it and enjoying using it. How what started that for you? Were you just poking at it because it was interesting, and then you've started to enjoy it, or
well, I mean, I'll be honest, like at the beginning in my professional kind of context of career, I mean, I was anti it.
yeah,
Also anti it because I was naive, right? And I mean, I think also, I'd caveat, and you know this too, like generative AI can mean many things, and
sure,
in a spectrum of when you're doing data or personalization or building out platforms, it's brilliant, right? And you
mm,
and I mean, I've been certainly working in that for a very long time, so it's not net new. I
mm,
think that, and look, and I think that it actually sprang from, I got to talk last year at Photo Vogue, which was a personal secret goal of mine for like 4 or 5 years on Gen AI. And then I had to
mm,
create this presentation, which upon reflection is probably not my best talk, but was the foundations of, I'd done a version of it in the media industry that was well received, but in the photographic, I hadn't quite got the language right. I
right,
also hadn't played with the tech a lot, and so I was spending days, like a week before, going, my
right,
images are shit. My images. Why can't I get what I see online? Why can't I get like these images? But also, that's not what I wanted. Like I find
mm,
Gen AI on its own literal. It's generic. I actually think of it more as illustration. I don't think of
mm,
it as photography. And if
yeah,
you get into the art world, this will be a long answer. Like they talk about all the different terms, and is it like proto photography? Is it something else? Like what's the distinction between digital if it's not through a lens and it's made through a computer, when ultimately digital is also through effectively computational language, right? And in the end, how I started playing with it in a way that had meaning for me was actually an accident. All happy
mm,
accidents, right?
mm,
Um, I having gone back into art, my previous project was around algorithms in a more recommendation context, not a creation context. But in this one, I was actually alone on Valentine's Day in Spain. And I was really tired of seeing on LinkedIn like all this like Valentine's Day marketing and messages, and then all the ads and and I'm currently single. And I was having this beautiful like retreat in Spain. So I thought, bugger it, I'm just going to make an image and put it online. And it's a stunning image, like, and it's the beginning of my new series, which was around my internet boyfriend, like the meme, right? Like meet
mm,
cute, right? Where and just some, I don't know how, because I've been playing and playing and playing. I got an image came back that was the right lighting, it was the right configuration, that when I composited it back into a real image, it just looked real. And I went, oh my God. I'm sure there are people doing this, but I haven't found, because it's part of my research, but like people tend to work into Gen AI and make stuff and it gets close to photography, or it's a version of photojournalism, or it's a version of narrative or stage, whereas I'm trying to blend the two. And now I'm having the time of my life. Like I'm going back and forth, and I've worked out my technique, and where I get stuck, I have friends and engineers that I can go to, and I go, oh, I can't do this thing.
Right.
And then it really annoys me when they come back in 30 seconds and go, here it is. I'm like, what did you do? Like,
yeah.
Well, what did you do to like come back? But yeah, but that's nice. I then get to work with photographers and engineers on the same thing, which is actually what I'm getting a lot of joy in, because I can geek out on both sides, right? I can have the existential, is this photography? What's the meaning of the image conversation? And then I'm like, I can't work out this API and this code. How does it work? I need it to do X.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm getting, it's cool right now. But I see it as a technique into my own photography. I wouldn't call myself a Gen AI photographer. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, like you say, Gen can mean a lot of things, and it is definitely going to change, and it's definitely going to what we're looking at now and what people think it's going to be for now. I was listening this morning to the interview, Decoder, Neela Patel's podcast at The Verge, and he interviewed the CEO of Zoom. And the CEO of Zoom is like, imagine you'll send your virtual avatar to a meeting and it'll answer questions for people. And I'm like, come on, man. Like that is the most wish casting. Like, we are so far from that. Like, if right now you could send your hallucinating generated avatar version of you to a meeting, and God only knows what it will say. Like, we're a fair ways off.
But also, why would you do that? I mean, I share, like last night, I was slightly doom scrolling on Instagram, but I got this amazing video of two people had put their Gen AI phones to each other, and they had a conversation with each other. It was brilliant, because obviously the question, like, it's the new ChatGPT 4.0, like they were talking to each other and then and then it got into quantum physics really quickly, and it was just so funny. We're so far, but also, what value is that adding? Yeah. Like, and I also go, should we as humans be doing this? Like,
that's the step that's missed. It's like no one's seen Jurassic Park. Like, it's that bit with Jeff Goldblum just needs to be played on a loop in Times Square as big as we can make it. That, like, your scientist, it wasn't earned, and your scientists didn't stop to think whether or not they should, right? Like, that's just every day.
But it's the seemingly unconnected that becomes connected. We can talk about the rates of loneliness. We can talk about the rates of depression. We can talk about the fact that, the younger generations really struggle with communication, and no one says, well, why would that be? And it's not just social media, because I don't believe that. But if you're not inherently giving people an ecosystem by which they can have meaningful relationships, the last thing that I want is my AI to be talking to someone else about a topic. My whole point of being is talking to you, virtually or in real life, about something that then feeds my soul, right? And I don't care what anyone says. They don't become sentient, and if they do, that's terrifying, because once then you get into Black Mirror, and you get into like true sci-fi, and you then go back to why is it helping humanity?
Yeah, no, completely. There was something I saw the other day that was someone going like, once again, we implore the CEOs of tech companies to watch the end of the movie, right? Like, it's just whether it's Ready Player One or Her, or whatever the film is. Like, these are great stories about people overreaching and the implications and we're playing with them in a sandbox of ideas, like you should, like societies and things should. But we should have a dialogue with those rather than before we go off and invent whatever, there's no ethics, is there?
No, but it's also that standard technical problem of they build the tech and then go, oh, we need to think about this as a business problem or a customer challenge, right, that we're trying to solve. But I do go back to, like, this is not even a future facing, like, it's a now problem, right? Like, I look at, because my work is often about intimacy and dating and and the algorithms, and people go, right, well, there's dating fatigue and they're off the apps, and Match.com has dropped 40% in revenue. I mean, if you go onto those things, they don't meet the consumer need, right? You're being paid. It's become I went on to one recently, because I'm off them now. and went, and it was like literally playing Candy Crush. And I'm like, what the, sorry, am I allowed to swear? But even if I don't, but like, what is this? Like, this is not a dating app.
Yeah.
And then if you don't get meaningful matches and you don't actually go on a date, but you're trying to charge me, 40 quid a month, like, you wonder why your revenues are down, right? And also when you get again, terrible with names, but the woman that set up Bumble, she was talking about you'd have your AI boyfriend, your bot, talking to another AI bot to screen. And I'm like, I don't need that. What I need is for you to give me a recommendation of someone I'm more likely to meet in real person. You're not solving for the problem, right? Like, you're actually creating for the problem, and then all that other unintended consequences that come from that, ghosting, swiping fatigue, like, just no one kind of looks holistically at the behavioral impact.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fact, the unintended consequences of algorithms is, we need to be discussing that, not in the future facing, because it's now, and we have vast evidence of where it works and where it doesn't. I was going to say before, like in other areas like health tech, it can be brilliant. And optimizing your health, it can be brilliant. But when it comes to human relationships, stories, politics, where there's like a meaning, I think we need to have deeper conversations.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I was talking to, so our eldest son, Lewis, was asking me at the weekend about phones and screen time for grown-ups, because from his perspective and from kids' perspective, grown-ups have just screen time all the time, like whether I'm working or whatever. It's like, well, you have all that screen time. And I was sort of starting to say to him, like, the companies making technology, I am a huge nerd. I love technology. I love a gadget. But the challenge is the companies making the devices 5-6 years ago put stuff in to help you reduce the amount of time and help you manage the amount of time you're spending on it. So I feel like there's like sort of 60-70 years ago Philip Morris vibes going on here, where like they know the product is maybe that it will come out in the wash at some point, that like there was a leap made, or they could see some sort of connective tissue. Like the people who went off and founded Humane, as silly a product as that is, and I think it's just, they're probably just way too early for the idea, and maybe don't quite have as rich and developed an idea of what that product is. But like, they're kind of appalled by the part they played in developing smartphones, and are worried about it, and are worried about the impact that they've, and this is them kind of, to some extent, reckoning with the guilt they feel by getting millions and millions of dollars to invest in a startup.
But that you should watch this South by Southwest talk, because he talks a bit about that too, because there's a tension between, so the platforms, right? Like if their North Star metric is watch time, that is time, right? Yeah. That is length, it's usage. And if you're doing that, that is at the detriment of you spending time elsewhere, right? Either on another platform or in real life. If in a dating app, subscription is your primary monetization, you don't want people to unsubscribe. So you need them paying month by month, which means they don't get the outcome that they think they're going to get, because ultimately, if you're continuing to pay for a subscription, you aren't actually meeting someone to get you off the app, right? Like
exactly.
That is profit. That's profiteering. That is understanding human behavior. And yet also then we as humans do a number of things. We then optimize for the algorithm. So we create content, or we create stuff to feed. It goes back to, I don't want to know your numbers, right? Because if you did, you'd start to optimize them. If you were monetizing, then fine. But like, if your goal is watch time and scale and reach, then you're not really, I don't know, I argue to some extent not delivering value, but then you're not also meeting, you're kind of having those unintended consequences, right? In any of those apps with your creator, you then optimize for the algorithm. You don't optimize for what you like doing.
No,
because
exactly.
An algorithm works by median and averages, and people forget that. Even Gen AI, which is the problem with Gen AI, which is why I struggled with it in the beginning, is I kept getting the same old crap out the system, right? And people can talk, which is totally true, about the kind of racial bias and all that stuff, but which is fundamentally a problem. But the other element is everything looks the same. Same image, same focal point, same design, same color, same. And that is because of the training data. So if you feed it something else, then it becomes interesting, but then you actually have to have a conversation with it. It's beyond keywords in that context. And I just think, well, yeah, we're a bit too early, unless you're a technologist, to understand that it's only, ironically, input now is just as important as outcome, because the input in determines the output, which then ultimately determines the outcome.
Yeah. And so that's why you've combined it, because I think that's where your stuff's so interesting as well, right? You're combining it with existing imagery and playing with it. So the images you shared with me the other week that we were looking at, like, it is hard to see the join. And that's good, I think, because that means that you're able to focus on producing something that tells a story. So the analogy that popped into my head was, when you used to watch old cartoons like Tom and Jerry, and you could see the thing that was going to move because it was painted differently to the background.
Yeah.
You don't have that. Like, I can't, in the ones I've seen, I can't see that kind of. I'm sure you can, because you worked on it, and you're like, you're still iterating, you're still working it out. But like, to me, you've achieved something already by virtue of these images are telling a story, and I don't immediately know whether it's staged or a setup shot or whatever. That's quite exciting to like see someone who's actually creative making things. So
yeah, and I'm really lucky because it's an accident, but it's an accident that's 3-4 years in the making, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I think that for me, because the topics that I'm interested is ultimately intimacy and connection in any form. That's kind of part one. The second part is that, like, I work in a very diary context. So I have this tension also when people are editing my work, because I had a friend here last week who's a really good editor, but he's not into technology. And we went back and forth, and then we got, I got tense and grumpy. And we were talking a lot about the seamlessness of it. And the ones, I've got other ones, and they're actually on the back wall, but where they're really obvious. He's like, nah, get rid of them. Because the point is that you have to see them and go, yeah, it's a nice image. And then get closer, and then get closer, and then go, hold on, something's not right. And then you kind of zoom back, and then a different conversation happens, right? Because ultimately, I mean, this image was created because I've taken all these images over the last 4 years in hotels and Airbnbs that I've stayed in. I didn't know a purpose. I take photos for no reason, and then a story appears.
Yeah.
And while I thought this story was going to be about relationships, it's ultimately actually about loneliness.
Right.
Because I've had people go, oh my God, you're really successful because not dating, but like all these men, da da da. And I said, but the men are fake. And they're like, oh crap. And then they're like, oh, so if you take the men out of the thing, you're actually on your own. And I'm like, yeah. So is it an imagined person? Is it my ideal person? Is it a projection? Like, it gets into a whole other conversation that isn't just give me keyword, like imagine prompt, a man on a bed, sitting there crying, lighting, blah, style Polaroid, lens, 50 mil. And that's how you write it, right? You write it like metadata. Whereas try and get it to tell something that's more layered than that.
Yeah. And do you kind of iterate? Are you using one of the tools like a Mid-Journey type thing where you can iterate on the image, or are you kind of getting the one you want and then trying a different prompt and getting things that are wildly different? Or is that too much? Also, if you don't want to go into technique.
No, I can go into technique. I think that this is a learning curve. Number one, the training model is my own images. So I haven't created a training model. So I don't think that would work, but I give it a base image. So I actually give it the image from the scene that I have.
Yeah.
And then I have to play. So I actually find if I'm less prescriptive, it actually gets more accurate faster. If I try and get super prescriptive, the images come out really cheesy. So the blending, I use Mid-Journey a lot for the blending. So a lot of it is image based. So it's image to image or image to prompt. And this is where I was talking to my engineer friend, because most of the AI is text to image, text to video, image to image, image to video. And I want to go the other way. So I've taken the image, I then create, and then I take it out, put it into Photoshop, and then I play. But the thing is, they're tiny. So there's a scale up issue. I've not printed them too big. These are A4, but I want to get them bigger. I don't mind if they're pixelated. I kind of want them to be. But where we're also playing now is around because I do a lot of work also in text and poetry. And I found this, and I think I said it to you, the poetry camera, which just blows my mind every time. And that is doing live image to text conversion poetry. And that's where I went to my engineer and went, I want to do that. I don't want to make the camera, but show me how to do that. And then he did it within 30 seconds. And I went, I've been trying to do that for weeks. But he did it in ChatGPT 4. So my headline to that is what I'm trying to do is have a conversation with it. So I iterate from, but once I get the image, that's it. What I haven't tried, but I don't want to, is character set. So it's always creating the same face. I don't want to, because actually the whole idea actually, and this is the thing, that ideas evolve based on feedback.
Yeah.
And the one that I'm struggling with at the most, because they were the ones my mate rejected, and not that I would only just listen to his voice, but it was true, is that in all the original images and the one you saw, I'm not touching the person, right? So you're in the scene, but there's only one or two where there's an element where you could be touching. And because you can't touch an AI, right? I'm trying to create images where it looks like we're holding each other or we're hugging or there's an element where hands. That's really hard.
Yes, right.
And that's where it's got really, and so that's why I've been trying different tools. So I'm in Midjourney. Photoshop is crap. Like, it does great background and removing back all the productivity stuff in Photoshop is brilliant. It's saving me hours, background cleanup, all of that. But when you try and do the generative, oh my God, the results are wacky as shit. I don't tend to use Stable Diffusion, but Midjourney's become my tool of choice, and I can craft around it, and I can get real and really close. But then the funny thing is, my mate, who again isn't into technology, didn't like the ones that were hyper real, where it was so real that you couldn't tell. He was like, "Oh no, that's too much." Right. So that's also and I've got wild results. Like, I've got one at the moment where, like, it literally looks like we're performing together. Well, we're just not. So it's a journey for me, but it'll be probably about 9 images in. They need to be properly edited, but hoping to have an exhibition a bit later in the year. But I'm going to blend it with, we've been talking about using more installations, using voice. So this whole her stuff, using voice. Maybe you create a conversation where you can talk to the men, creating poetry from the images. So that's basically metadata back out. And maybe that's a bit naive, but they're things I'm exploring, right? So that ultimately everything is constructed except for me. Like, I'm the real thing in the image. But am I the real thing in the image? I don't know, because am I real? I don't know, because then it's become, am I real? So then you get into that kind of conversation.
I love this. This is so cool. That's so good. But also, everything you've described there sounds doable with where things are at right now. Like, you could turn, build a language model that can be man A versus man B and would give different answers. Someone from Square Enix, I think last year at GDC, the Games Dev Conference, showed off a demo of using an LLM to create characters in a game that basically never say the same thing to you. So rather than writing tons of dialogue, because in old adventure games like Monkey Island or something like that, King's Quest, when we used to play those in like the 90s, you knew you'd exhausted a branch of the game when you clicked and got the same dialogue again, and eventually the dialogue branch would end with, I guess you're gonna have to keep exploring, Guybrush, and off you'd go, or whatever. Whereas now the idea would be that you build a model that runs within the game, and then you go and talk to it. And I think, because that's going to have to be crafted and authored by people, and they're going to have to obviously find ways to safeguard against wild hallucination.
But I love the one, because I think people are playing with that at the moment. I saw another meme where it was a video game where it had 4 AIs, and they had to guess who was the fake person, as in who was the real person. It was kind of obvious because the AIs were talking so structured. And then the person was like talking, and they were like, "You're not AI." And I think that these are these fun, like, if you work it, it's fun to explore that stuff. It's just that, what does it mean when someone works out how to monetize it? Because then it becomes problematic. And the reason I get into that is because my topic's often about intimacy and dating and relationships. Like, you can have an AI boyfriend. I can talk to one right now, and it's really odd. And in parts of Asia, like, people who are lonely, they would prefer to talk to a therapist who's an AI or something that's fake. And then I'm like, but you're not. The thing about people forget is that actually humans are animals, right? We crave touch, we crave sense, we crave smell. I do not crave, but these are parts of our we're pack animals, right? And we thrive on community. So if you remove all of those constructs and you're sitting in a room talking to someone, someone just like thinking that you're having the thing that ultimately you don't have, right? then all sorts of challenges happen with your physiology, with the way that you think and the way that you believe, and also the way you act. Because
Yeah.
so it's like being on social media and getting a dopamine hit when you get a like, or you talk to someone. That's ultimately not a
Mm.
real. I mean, it is real dopamine, like if you talk to a scientist, but ultimately it's
Yeah.
not giving you the thing you desire,
Yeah.
right? And the contact and your body, your brain doesn't make a distinction. Did I get the thing I
Yep.
desired, or did I feel that I think that I got the thing I desired? And that what the AI is doing is making you think that you have,
Yeah.
right?
It's like the insulin spike that you get when you drink a sugar-free drink because your body
Yes.
thinks it was getting something but it isn't, and then so consequently you don't get that feedback, and so that's over time that's bad for us. It's not good for us, and we can see it from other things. So yeah, I do feel like we're sleepwalking into stuff, which is why it's nice to kind of have a conversation with someone who's making things with this in an interesting way, and there's a human at the center of it rather than the scaremongering conversation and fear around it, because it's very easy also, I think, to just go no to all of it, just no, because I think
No,
there's
yeah.
there's use, right?
But you need artists in the room. So I went to a conference recently with the Photographers Gallery, virtual photography, and they had a whole lot of people that are working with GANs, but also with historical archives. And while like it's not an area I explore, and a lot of the talk was around colonialism and histories and remembering histories, it was absolutely blew my mind because it goes to input in determines output and outcome, right? And you and I would know this in product, everyone's it's all about the outcome. And I'm like, well, it's actually also about the input. And a really good way of describing that is when you look at historical archives. If the historical archive that you use to train an LLM is only written from the perspective of the successor or the winner, so let's say an American culture and it was for the New York Library, it's got the white male, and then all the people that were photographed were either slaves or in prison, da, da, da. When you train the LLM, it assumes that all people of that type did that thing, right? And it's like, well, no. And so these amazing artists are trying to create new histories, right? Not necessarily a new history, but a way of exploring history that isn't through one lens. And I think,
Yeah.
again, that's the danger of LLMs, is that they become, well, social media. It's not even like you only see more of the same stuff you like. So TikTok, and
Yes.
all
Yeah.
element of serendipity is gone. All.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, the beauty of life, it ultimately comes from having serendipity
Mm.
and
Yeah.
chance and spontaneity in your life. So if you're always like, I must do this, I must attend this, Google says I must travel here, you lose all element of
Mm.
exploration and learning. So
Yeah.
again, unintended consequence, right? But also not
Yeah.
travel. And I think we're having a bounce back. I mean, like Griffin, my son, is off a lot of the platforms. He has them for his own communities, but they're private, locked
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah.
He's not interested really being on social unless he knows the people. He's not. I mean, he
Yeah.
wants to. It might change as he grows a business and a brand and la la la. But
Mm.
ultimately, he's using it for connection, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's also rebelling against the show Beijing that we would have had in the last 10 years about the kind of influencer framework, basically, where you're supposedly knowledgeable on something, but ultimately it's in some context. I watched a great
Yeah.
doco last night about TikTok and cults. Is like, if someone can monetize you, you just become a puppet in a circus, right? You just become someone to perform,
Yeah.
and a society of spectacle.
Yeah. Well, on the subject of performance, because you were also here partly to perform, did you choose three lenses to talk about as
I did
part
actually
of as
choose,
part of this? I
well, to,
wasn't sure if you
well, to
would, because I thought you might reject the premise a little bit to some extent, which is also fine.
no, no, but I did think that I would modify the premise.
Oh, good.
Constraints drive decisions, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, I don't use three lenses. Is the answer to that question?
Excellent. How many do you
So I'm
use?
not. I'm not a geek. Like I'm not a technical
I love the way you modified
kind
that part mid sentence. I'm not a massive loser nerd like you, Farrell.
that is your projection of it. It's not what I said. That's what you heard. It's not what I
Yes,
said.
that's my
But what I said,
insecurity speaking.
it's you. Yeah. I just want you to know, because I love and revel in your your love of technology. That's why when I see something that's a great, like the poetry camera, you are the first person
Mm.
I send it to,
Oh.
because the geeky, you were actually the first person I sent it to, because it's just like, this is just like wacky and freaking a
Yeah,
great intersection
it's
of
very
physical
cool.
product. And so,
Mm.
but at this, but I don't, but so I used to like really care about kit. I'll give you the history, right? Like I think of myself as having two photographic kind of, I won't say careers because they're not careers, but kind of ways of working. When I studied in Australia, and I mean, I had the full bag, I had all the lighting, and I felt very much my identity. I'm a photographer because I have, you know, broncolor lights, and I have a really big box, and I have the whole range of lenses, and I use Canon.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and I lugged it all around, and I was a wedding photographer, and I could do all of that stuff. Whereas I now use one camera, two lenses, and increasingly just one lens. But that is to simplify the decisions I need to make when I shoot.
Yeah.
It's also a learning that I had. So the other context of that is that in Australia, this is a bit tangential, but not. But Australian photography, all photography is around light, right? And you can look at light. You can look at kind of national photography in certain countries. Aside from the narratives that they use, you can also really understand how light works. We start back to like London and weather and so forth.
Yeah.
Australia is really bright, and to shoot in Australia, you often need to use a flash even in daylight to flatten out the light. Otherwise, you just got to get a great big, you know, shadow between one side and the other.
Yeah.
You don't get that in the UK, right?
You get natural diffusion from the clouds.
Correct. But you also get lots of colour. Like Australia is either bright blue, dark and wet, and that is it.
Yeah.
London, I've learned, particularly in being Dalston, it has all colours of the rainbow depending on the light. So all the different light Kelvin during the day. That's the geeky bit when you want to talk geeky. We can talk light rather than lenses. I will answer your question. When I lived in Spain, it was the same. I mean, Madrid was just a kaleidoscope of colour. When I left Australia to come to the UK, I didn't, most of the time I've known you, I didn't shoot at all. I basically sold all my kit. That was a very difficult process, but once it was gone, it was fine. When I rebuilt the kit, I also, and it had to be a travel kit. So because I travel all the time, it sits in a bag. Everything that I have photographically, and obviously even when I shoot, it's hard because I don't shoot with a tripod. I need to get a light one because I can't just bunging a camera and then running it off my phone. There's better ways of doing it. But so I had to get a light camera, so I moved to Sony, and I basically can only travel with two lenses. So it's a 50 mil. Actually, I've got three, so light, but it's a 24-70 or a 24-210. And that is because I need it to be light. It sits on my back. It has my laptop in it, and that is also because the work that I do now. And again, because I came back to photography. When I hadn't been, she was in Madrid, it was COVID, and I wanted to go to this workshop in France. And I kept saying to the woman, like, you're going to have Spain and France were open, but England was not. Are there going to be international people? She said yes. And the reason I wanted to go was that the photographer that was running it, who was hosting it, Claudine Darry, had a beautiful sense of light. And I wanted to flip my work so that the light, my interpretation of light was really key to what I did, and plus it's just softer. European photography has way more nuance to it than like if you look at sort of the different cultural aspects. I was the only foreigner there that spoke English. I mean, I've actually my community is that group. I have about 4 or 5 that like spoke between Claudine. Everyone spoke English, but between those that could do sarcasm and those that were doing just business in English, French, so it ended up being like all in French. One of the best experiences, but the whole time going, I'll never exhibit again. I'm not an artist. And that's where my first project came from. But from that, I basically removed all essence of technology. Does that make sense? Like, it's the long answer to I don't use lighting anymore. I've got a flash. I'd never use it. So the first series I did was with flash, but it kind of interrupts what I do. And the lenses, if they're big, interrupts what I do, because what we worked on, and I personally worked on, was it's intimacy, right? Getting close to my subject. And to get close to my subject, I have to remove all technology. Not ironically, but that's part of, like, I was thinking about that because I had to make sure I knew my answer also when you asked. But it made me think about it because I've taken away the technology so that ultimately, if I'm taking someone's image, they don't feel like their image has been taken. And that's really important to me. And it's now my kind of current exploration is that what is it to feel like to have a conversation with someone when often in our visual world, people think that we all like our picture being taken. And most don't. I hate my picture being taken. And so to get someone to relax and I don't want the big setup. I don't want the flash to go off. I don't want this big lens that kind of zooms in and out. So I've gone to the 50mm 1.8, right? And we then end up dancing to some extent. But Claudine taught me that. She didn't tell me technically what to do, but because we were removing, I overcomplicate things. So, and even my friend Luis he's a Spanish Venezuelan photographer. I'm learning so much from these people about how to approach connection, community, relationships, and also light and color and story. So it's the answer to your question, but like I don't anchor myself on what's in my bag.
No, I love it.
Does that make sense?
It really does. And I think what's brilliant about asking that question and having a format, like the reason that I wanted to make these was when I hit on the idea, because I knew that people would play with it. So like someone I interviewed the other day, all three were 35s. Two of them were versions of the same lens, just made at different times. And then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, people like Dan Milner, who just basically reject the premise because they come from a journalist background. And they're like navel gazing and choosing a lens for its rendering is an occupation of the wealthy. Like, I ain't got time for that. He like came up through, he arrived at the newspaper he worked at first and was told, get this camera, get this lens, go here, take these photos, and you better come back with something, because otherwise you won't be coming back tomorrow. And so like my whole premise actually is fun because it only exists through the luxury of me being a tourist. Like, you know, the thing I say almost every episode. Well, a little bit in the sense that it's not my job, so I can enjoy it and I can just do it for fun, and I don't have to. I don't have a project that's eating at me that I must manifest. So I don't have that kind of creative thing that is. I mean, I may one day, and I've got images I want to make and images I enjoy making, and I get satisfaction from it. But I'm very fortunate that I can talk about it with people and be a communicator of it rather than, you know, that pressure.
Oh, well, I should have rejected it then, but I thought, no, if I don't follow the brief, you'll get frustrated.
Yeah, no, it's good. Oh gosh, no, it's lovely. It's lovely. You're
no, I'm
playing
not
with it.
frustrated. I know you wouldn't, but like but it also I mean, the beauty of that question too is it makes you go, what matters to you in the image making process. So, and when you said that, like, I think again, I don't sit on either fence because I love the craft, and I mean, I was trained in film as well. So, and I used to spend, you know, days deciding, am I shooting in Porsche? Is it black and white? Is it Kodak? Is it like, you know, like Fuji? Like, which film am I choosing? Because that's a very important decision based on what you're then going to do in the darkroom. And then you go in the darkroom, it's like, what chemicals at what level? And like, you know, which paper? And is it matte? And like, am I going to leave it in long enough? All that beautiful craft. It's why the Apple ad was so toxically bad that like kicked off on the internet recently, is that the beauty of creativity is all the accidents you make. Like I said, like this project is not something where I wrote a brief and said, go do this, go here, come back with some pictures. It's been percolating for a while. But like my question isn't what lens I use, because I tend to shoot a certain way, which I want to break from. I mean, I'm going to upgrade my camera, so I will do research, and lenses are everything, right? Like in digital, and what I've said to people, you can get a lower resolution camera, but if your lens is shit, your lens is shit. And you know that when I shoot on iPhone, right? A shit lens is a shit lens. So invest in the lens as opposed to the back was always the advice, and I would still stand by that. But I have questions now then more around paper, which is hilarious because I haven't done print in ages. But like, what paper? Is it translucent? How big do I want to go? What's the scale? They're all the same questions of the lens question. It's just that I'm interested in a different phase of the process. Yeah. How can I get what I don't even know what the Midjourney is, but when I put it into Photoshop on my 40 meg file, it's like this. It's like tiny, but it's Photoshop 10 years ago couldn't scale up to what it does now.
No.
Oof, the interpolation's extraordinary, and knowing how that works is brilliant because but I go back to my biggest challenge with the Midjourney and the AI is getting the lighting to match. Because for it to not look fake, the person needs to look like they're in the room, which means that if there's a lamp on the left, the lamp needs to be shining light on the left of his face, not the right. Otherwise, your eye would go, hold on, something's not right here. Right? And so those techniques that the best thing I'm lucky. I am the last generation that did digital as an elective, not digital We weren't even allowed to do digital when I studied photography, which shows my age. And my ex-partner was like, you have to get into it. And I said, no, I'm a purist. It has to be print. He goes, it's the future. Now, whether you do cyanotypes or printing, that's the elective, right?
Yeah, it's
But
gone the other way around completely.
yeah, but if you don't know light, and like I
I
have
agree.
friends that go, how do you get light? And I said, well, I can fix your picture in Photoshop because I understand color. And color came from moving those dials
Yeah,
on the color machine.
yeah.
It's like that inherent learning where I can color cast something and fix it or not fix it or play with it. So color and light, as I said to you, by removing the flash, which was my Australian background, by removing the flash has opened up a world of photography that I had not explored, and that is color. And that is not color with the filter, which is really another question is what filters do you use? But like I know I don't need to because I can post in Photoshop in a really good way, but like I really care about the time of day I shoot or where the light is, because even if it's like London, this light here is really blue at this time of day. If the sun comes out, it's still blue, but it goes a really like cyan blue, and then it can go into red because I can dial it up or down. And people go, "Where did you know? How did you shoot that?" It's all natural. It's just, I mean, it's edited with AI, like in post, but it's not. I'm not putting a filter, and I'm not shooting infrared or anything like that. Like it's just that's what the light is. You just can't see it in our modern world.
Color is my next thing, I think. And
Oh,
you've had friends presumably who've read the Alan Carr smoking book, right, to try and quit smoking. Have you come across that? So this guy Alan Carr, not the comedian, did a book about quitting smoking, and in the book he's like, "Don't stop smoking when you start reading the book. There will just come a point in the book when you will just want to stop smoking," and it's really clever. I've never read it, so I don't know, but all my friends have done it and they've stopped smoking. And I just recently read the Joel Meyerowitz book, A Question of Color, and that's done that for me on black and white and color. Like I was really enjoying black and white photography, and then suddenly I've read this book about color where he shot photos of black and white and color side by side, and I've come out of it. I've not shot a black and white frame since, because there was this one bit, I was reading it on a plane, and there was this one bit where they were talking about if you wanted to represent a scene, losing all color from the scene, you're not really representing it anymore. And that just something in my brain flipped. Well, yeah, but I'm sure I'll come back to black and white, but I am loving the color.
so I would add a layer to that and say not just color lighting. So if you really want to get into an amazing like black and white film, have you watched Ripley yet? Well, not film,
Not
the
yet.
series, shot in black and white, and it is film noir. I mean, it goes back to 1940s, like the way that it's shot, like styled, like seeing the positioning. It is and it gets feeling, it gets tension, it gets and that is a huge craft. That goes by like if you look at even old when I worked at Conde, like you go into the archives, those like Irving Penn that could shoot in black and white, they also knew light. All right.
Yeah.
So even shooting in black and white, you need to understand light and you need to understand Kelvin, not obviously the technical side, but what it does to the skin, the face, the hair, key lights and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I just like shooting because then you get in different times of day without lighting because it allows for all that serendipitous stuff to come in again. But I mean, I'm
Yeah.
looking actually photos on my wall, and the ones that tend to resonate with people who see them the most are the color
Mm.
ones. But they are, I've got one that I shot in Ireland recently, but I looked at it and I could see the dimensions. It's
Yeah.
it's almost black and white, but it's in color. But because it was a foggy 7 a.m. in the morning, it
Right.
was actually just after I, had a really bad 24 hours. But I look at it and it's just layers. But
Yeah.
I know when I looked at it, I went, I don't know. I had to make sure that the camera. All I want to make sure is that the camera can read the layers, so I could fix it later. It's the whole thing about film. If it's overexposed or underexposed, what digital does really now is it kind of compensates. So, and even if you bracket, you can actually get the full spectrum and bring it back. You couldn't do that in film. If you messed it up, you messed it up. So,
Yeah. We do get away with a
um,
lot with raw files, and it's that funny thing. Like there's so much detail, especially in shadows on like a modern digital camera. There's so much detail in the shadows. Like if you,
so don't,
I set mine to
yeah,
expose for highlights now. I don't even just expose for like multimetering or whatever. I just expose for highlights because that seems to be the most
yeah.
important thing.
But I would just say, I agree moving back and forth. But the beauty of black and white when done well creates the same depth and emotion, but it's ultimately about color and color, perspective, and depth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think I'll go through moods.
yeah, because I've got some pictures that I shot a while ago that were all in color, and they're lovely, but they don't feel like a series. And then again,
Right.
playing, I took out the black and white. Took them out to black and white, and went, whoa, that's a whole nother series now, because
Right.
the color was interfering with the narrative. Weirdly,
Okay.
because I was doing mixed gels in a studio and la, and when I took it out,
Yeah.
just the images
Suddenly you can
are the
see it.
same. Something they were saying, and actually, weirdly, the color, again, it's a learning. I'm looking at them now because again they're on my wall. The blue to the yellow creates really good tonality when you go back to black and white. That I
Okay.
don't get when I convert. So I'm like, oh, but if you look at if you go back, couldn't name a film. If you go back to old black and white films, they were shot with crazy colors. So they were styled to get the really dark black, or lipstick would have been red to get the lighter colors. So if you were to look at the actresses, they would have looked hideous in color, but because they were shooting for the tonal system, right? So the red is your darkest, blue is your mid-tone, and so you start to, even though we see blue as darker than potentially red, darker and black and white. Do you know what I mean? Like you learn all. That's when I can geek out.
Was there any? I guess actually that's interesting on the black and white and the color photography. Like, who do you look at? Because what you're doing is a really new field that you're exploring right now. Are you looking at other people? Is there anyone else who's kind of like in the area that you're looking at, or do you feel like you're kind of out there on your own at the moment?
You'd never be out there. There's always someone doing. I mean, your ego can probably tell you that you're doing something new and challenging, but I will end up finding someone doing something similar for sure. There are, like, Foam Amsterdam has got an exhibition at the moment on AI and future photographies, but a lot of it for me at the moment, if I look at that space, at least people that I'm observing, again, if anyone wants to point me in direction of people who are doing image first to compositing, which is probably no different to CGI, but like a lot of it is playing with narratives into Gen AI first and then creating renders from that, and videos. I have a really lovely network. I've been going back to like the workshop I did in France, which is Eyes in Progress. And if you ever want to do one, I mean, I highly recommend that you do it. They have amazing photographers from around the world, like Todd Ido and Ed Cashy. So you can do journalism, fashion, and Veronique who runs it. I mean, it's just. But from that became my little community. So whether it's Claudine, I've got my 4 or 5 French photographers that I met, which is really nice, right? And we talk on WhatsApp. I'll be in Arles in a couple of weeks. So I'm trying to actually, rather than go broader, I think for me, because I'm in loads of different worlds, and this, I live in a tech world and I live in this world, that for me to keep focus is to stay within my community. So I'm on a trustee of a photographic board, PhotoWorks, and then I've got my friends. So I'm using them to like meet someone, look at this person's work. Have
Yeah.
you been? And so, yeah, like my friend Luis Cabello, he's a Venezuelan Spanish photographer. And when he told me his life story, and that's a whole other podcast. I mean, he started his job as a press photographer in Venezuela in the 80s. So he's like
Wow.
showing photos with like Chavez, and like his mornings were like shooting, so photographing what happened like in the crime scene, and then shooting like a world I have no concept of.
Yeah.
Now
Wow.
lives in San Fran, but he's beautiful. His work is incredible, and that's why And I met him actually randomly. He'd appreciate this too. I actually met him on Tinder 10 years ago. We never dated, but he's become kind of the editor of my work.
That's fantastic. That's wonderful.
So we met in Madrid. Never dated. Met 4 years later through the photography world, and now become friends. And he edited my last book and gave me some feedback when he came here. But yeah, so I guess a long answer, but like I'm working, and it's interesting because there are people like him who are like not interested, right, in it. And there's collectives like Fellowship XYZ, which are really into the kind of the image making aspect. I'll do there's Charlie Engelman doing stuff with his mother, and I'm like, all of that's really cool. But they're exploring, and there's loads, like I said, with the virtual photography, doing histories and colonial past, and like, which is it's taken me on another tangent. But I've had to kind of bring it back because, like, I need to finish the work, so I'm easily distracted, and it's not a full. I'm like you. I have a day job, And this stuff takes time. Like I can't just go, oh, I've got 5 minutes, I'll edit. Like I have to
Yeah.
remove a person out. I have to, it's like I take the product person out of my world and bring the creative person, and then I'll disappear for 3 days in my head, right? Like, because I'm making them in my head. So I don't know if that's an answer, but yeah, there are people working, and I explore, but I'm really into people, like the work of people who are exploring connection, relationships. So it doesn't matter. Like, even if it's a good film, Ripley's amazing, right? And
Yeah,
I
I should
now
watch
for the
that.
yeah, and now, and it's like for the first time, and I've had to. This has been a hard journey, but like for the first time in a number of years, because I'm not working full time in a senior job, and I've got a portfolio career, and like I'm my son is an adult, so I'm the true empty nester. I get to be slower and more selfish in my practice, which is very rewarding, but it's a shift because I haven't had this
Yeah.
time. And for me, then it's I if I try and use the algorithm, great, but as I said before, it doesn't actually help my mental health on any level. Serendipity helps more. So I'm trying to now just like who and what, this one conversation. My friend from Paris sent me a 15-minute voice note yesterday on what he'd learned on some exhibition, and I'm like, oh my god, that's a note. And there's a photographer I need to. So I don't use algorithms anymore. You tell me to watch a show, I'll watch it. You tell me to read a book, I'll read a book. Like,
Yeah.
that's enough for me right now.
I think that's a better way. It's funny, there's a theme emerging from the conversations I'm having with people more recently that that's what they want. And and people are seeking less perfection as well. So they're seeking the lens that isn't perfect technically, or the equipment that isn't perfect technically. Ali O'Keefe, who I spoke to a few weeks back, and she and I talk a lot. She's big into like digicams and has this whole thing about there's no such thing as a bad camera. And even Torsten Overgaard, who I spoke to last night, who's like shoots loads of Leica gear, has an M11, was very candid about how he doesn't like it and doesn't think he like it is as good in a lot of ways as the M10 was. Like he's straight out there, and he's like this other lens that was perfect. He's like, it's boring. It doesn't. It's too perfect. Like there comes a point where
Yeah.
technically you've reached a point, and so he's like he's almost not interested in any camera that comes out from now because it'll just be too good in
Well,
some
also you
ways.
have to keep relearning. Like I always wanted a Leica, I could never afford it, and
Mm,
I didn't go and always wanted a medium format camera, but it's not my tool of choice. I mean, for me to shoot medium format, that's very different. That's a very different setup with the subjects and the people you're working with, and a beautiful way. I've got
mm,
friends that still shoot film medium format, right? So
yeah,
slow and really considered, and you get a certain type of image from that.
yeah,
But God, it's almost like you have to relearn. Like it was hard. I have to go back. It was really hard learning how to use the mid journey the way that I wanted, because but it's like everything, right? Like learning to ride a bike, you fall off 100 times, and I hated it in the beginning. But they are my tools, and I have always worked in digital, right? Always. So, and therefore, it's leaning into that and understanding that more, and actually then removing constraints drive decisions, like it just does. And the
yeah,
constraint is I don't need loads of kit,
yeah.
but I do need to understand, for the purposes of the work that I'm trying to create, what are the best tools and techniques. If I do get into installation, at the moment, as I said, it back to paper. Can I stick things on the wall? How is that made? Like, you're then on that learning curve rather than which camera, which lens do I upgrade.
Yeah, which I think is a much more interesting thing to get to because there comes a point where, especially with modern cameras, they are similar enough at this point that actually a lot of the time what you get out of things, if you have a look and if you have a style, you can probably achieve that look and style with just about any modern camera system. But it does sort of a nice note to end on potentially is like you mentioned you're going to get a new camera. This wouldn't be gear chat with heart if we didn't like, because the only thing that's nearly as good as buying a camera is helping someone else to buy a camera. So what's on the list? Like, are you going to stick
well,
Sony or what are you thinking?
well, I could be really lazy and just upgrade Sony.
Yeah, got all the glass
So that,
presumably. Well, you've got the glass, like that one lens that you use.
yeah, or it's a time and investment factor, or I could switch.
Mm,
But if I switch, the problem is if I switch, I have to switch everything. But
yes.
then again, I'm only using like one lens or one
Mm,
approach, and I don't think that's going to change based on the way I live, work, shoot now.
yeah.
But it's not it's just because I'm just like, to be fair, like getting back to work and getting a pipeline of stuff. It's not a current priority, but it is
Mm,
because, and to be fair, I probably will change Sony. And you know why? Because their
Mm,
integration into shooting remote is terrible. Their
right.
when I use it on an iPhone is god awful. And maybe it's because my camera is 4 or 5 years old and they've updated the firmware. But
Mm,
my ability to sync in real time is, it's either me being the user, so it's probably that 90% of the time, but it just doesn't work. And
right.
it just should. And if you go onto any forum, it's the only time I go onto forums, it's all
Mm,
people complain about. It's how
yeah.
Sony
The
don't
remote app.
do the remote app stuff. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
that's the name of the game for even professional photographers. So
Yeah.
if I change, that'll be my number one criteria, is to test remote phone integration and then downstreaming onto my laptop, because otherwise it will remove a whole element of my workflow.
Yes.
But I don't know if I'm the problem, so I have to then investigate whether it's me just being a Luddite, or I suspect it's both, because I'm not a Luddite when it comes to
No,
technology. So I suspect,
exactly. Yeah.
and
I
if
think
there's
it's
a
the
better
job of technology
solution,
to work. Mm,
yeah, yeah. And some of the short answer is I am up for advice and information, but the use case is being able to have the phone as the remote control. It's up
yeah.
onto my laptop immediately, and it's shooting on a camera with a nice lens and all wireless. So
Yeah.
if some, if Canon is better for that, I'm back to Canon.
Yeah. No, fair. I don't know what Nikon's like for that stuff. The Leica app's very good, I'll just say.
I have heard.
I mean, I think an SL3 you'd really enjoy. I'm not sure an M would work for you because you need some autofocus. Manually, like zone focusing your tripod shot with a Leica M seems like making your life a little bit harder than it probably needs to be honest.
Yeah, and to be fair, this is terrible. Is that my eye focus? My is so bad, and
Yeah,
I've never actually have to get laser fixed. I have to rely, and I know it's going to get worse, on the noise of the camera telling me that it's in focus.
yes,
Which is a terrible thing, but it's another constraint, right? Like,
yeah,
it also means that I'm looking at It's a whole other conversation I need to end. But like, when I'm setting up scenes, sometimes I can't see them because it's so blurry for me. So I'm
right.
seeing them almost as a blurred image,
Mm,
and I need the sounds, which makes that's an interesting paradigm for a photographer that's so whose tool is their eye. But that's a whole
yeah.
nother conversation. So yeah, if a manual focus is just not going to work,
No, no, I don't think you need to give yourself that challenge. You know,
no.
it's those of us that are addicted to the Leica M are a special form of broken toy. I think at this point, like
Yeah.
it's a particular form of mental illness where you're like, I could have all these things and there's all these shots that I could get, but I'm going to set myself the additional complicated challenge of using, you know, yeah, even to some extent using auto ISO feels like cheating, you know, and I just drive it with like I've
Oh, I love
recently
all that.
switched to it. I've recently switched to auto ISO, and that's been great because if I set the auto ISO and I set my shutter speed, I like to use quite a high shutter speed typically. So
Oh.
then just driving everything through the aperture on the lens ring is very tactile and very direct for me.
Oh, actually, I don't do that, and the reason is I don't like it over controlling. But that goes back to my film days, and
Yeah,
I'm sure it doesn't do the thing that it says, like 100 to 200 to 400. I mean, what is that really in a digital
yeah,
camera, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
and you don't need that. It's just like, is there enough light going onto my
Yes,
lens? Shoot,
yes,
you decide. But I don't. Yeah, so because I go, it looks like a day where I need about 400. I mean, it's just like, why would I know? Why would I say or
yeah,
know that? But like, yes.
yeah.
So
No,
I
it's funny.
don't,
It's
but I do, yeah, I do auto, I don't do full manual. It's
no.
uh fixed ISO and then change the aperture.
Yes. So for me, because I quite like things to be like to use quite a high aperture, like 5.6 or 8 or something like that, because I'm exploring a kind of slightly more documentary style of image rather than this. Because I think it's in reaction. It's a very Ian thing to some extent. In reaction that everyone else is going in the direction of like really like this lens goes down to like 1.1 and I can focus on an eyelash and the background goes really blurry and it's just like but there were other things there and I feel like and the photographers I admire are like Andre Wagner's and Jesse Marlowe's and people like that to some extent who capture the world and show you a bit of the world. So they're shooting at like 35, 28, so that kind of field of view. and you can see what's going on. And I'm interested in that at the moment with my own images. So I quite like the fact that like you can see a bit. It's not just shallow depth of field on an expensive lens because I could afford a Summilux, which I couldn't, which is why I don't have one. You know.
And I could say that too, and I do that too, but I also go keep for me the image as raw and as dense as possible, because I do most. I mean, not that people go, you can't fix it in post. It's not a fix it in post, but I do my editing in post. I'd find it very hard to work with an editor because of the way that I fix and correct my images. But you can do a lot of those things in Photoshop, right? So I go, right, give me enough depth, give me enough range, give me enough color, and then I'll determine. Which is why I couldn't work commercially, because I couldn't batch process fast enough, and I don't use Lightroom. Like I do it. I am old. I still
you're photoshopping each one. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because that's how, because I like each one needs its own attention.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm not a commercial photographer. I do it for other purposes. And the craft for me is fixing each image. My storage is through the roof, but I've had this argument before. I never quite got Lightroom, but maybe it is that thing. I just need to spend the 2 weeks learning it.
Well, I don't know if it would do what you want it to do, because you're combining things. Like, and I think Lightroom very much allows you to work fairly efficiently with what you've got in front of you. Like for me, Lightroom Classic's great because I like to shoot with lenses that don't talk to the camera body, so I like to tag them with the actual metadata for the lens because I'm that person. So I like to add that in. So I can, so like I've had to switch to using a laptop rather than using an iPad because that's something that enables. But I want to know when I'm looking at images, when I'm trying to get better and I'm trying to learn from them, I want to know whether I used the Zeiss or the Leica lens or the whatever, what did I shoot this with? And so I'm using things like Lens Tagger. I'm a big metadata believer. I'm the last person in the world using Flickr, it seems. Like, so, all of those things combined to like, I've got a workflow, but I'm working with what I produced. I'm working with what came out of the camera. I'm not combining it with something else. For you, Lightroom would introduce another step where you would, because it does, you press a button, it punts it to Lightroom, and then it can pull it back in, and they've done that work. But you immediately feel like I'm moving from one application to another, and these are not the same thing. And it does, even in a modern world where these applications launch almost instantly, you do just still feel like you're moving from one thing to another, and it's like gear change,
I mean, that's why I love talking to you, because it's such a spectrum and a field of photography, and it's nice. But you anchor then to what the joy that you get from it. Yeah. And as I said to you, I used to be massive. I mean, I am still massively into all that stuff. But part of the journey is to try and remove as much back then. That's what I get. I got to learn back from these beautiful photographers that I've now met and helped me, and I help them in their work. Is like reducing it back to the essence of the image itself, and then I can add back layers. And my tools tend to be, I like sitting on the laptop with the headphones on, some dance music, and then people go, "Where'd you get that image?" I said, to be fair, the AI one, they said, "Where'd it come from?" I was bored on my own in a beautiful remote part of Almeria in Spain, and sitting there going, it's Valentine's Day, and I had my bottle of wine and my open fire. It was a fabulous evening. So I thought, okay, I'll make my fake boyfriend. And then all of a sudden, that would not have happened would not have happened. And then it's become now a journey. Like I now have a body of work of a set of images that were okay, but like now there's something else. So and that's why we're talking now too. Like it's something to talk about. It wasn't something to talk about until the images were nice, but like now it's something to talk about.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's so good. And it is so good to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on. It's really good. Like I said, I wanted to make sure I wasn't bad at this before I interviewed people. You were never gonna
be bad at it.
There's no guarantees, is there? Like we've not done this before. Like now I've recorded you're number 16, I think. I feel like I'm finding my sea legs now. But
sweet 16.
Right, there you go. But like what will number 26 be like? Who knows? Might be great, might be terrible. It won't be as good. It's not with you. There we go.
Like all art, and then like if you want to, and my art teacher, when I like when I get annoyed, she's like, get out of your bloody head and start making images.
Yeah. Oh, getting out of your head. Yeah.
It's no different to prototyping. Just get it out, and it is meant to be crap. It is meant to not work. It is meant, like, the process of making is accidents, and it's connections, and it's conversations, and like, so the podcast, you should look back and go, whoa, A to B is like,
Yeah.
I sit in like memes. We could talk about like Taylor Swift. They're doing it at the moment. What she was like at the beginning of her tour and what she's like now. Same setup, same gig, same performance, but she is like so different. Or you learn to dance, but it's the learning curve. And I'm terrible because I stay in my head way too long. And my challenge and where I get the value is when it's out of my head. So,
yeah, I think for all of us. There we go. Well, there's a message for everyone. Get out your heads, kids. Pick up your cameras.
Yeah.
And go outside and run around. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of day. Yeah. I'll speak to you again soon.
All right. Keep me posted. And thank you. It was really lovely doing it.
Yay.
Cheers.
All right. Loved it. Take care. Bye. You can rate and review this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and that'll help people to find the show. You can also sign up for a midweek newsletter that I've started doing. You can get that at ianfarrell.com/sign-up, and there is a link to it in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.